Hello, folks, and welcome back to Gearbox Podcast, your weekly dose of podcast. I'm Nick,
And I'm Moxi.
and ladies and gentlemen, it's time. It's this time of the year. We are doing the 2022 review from the 2022 season. What a season, Moxie. Do you agree?
Yeah, a really interesting season. We saw a lot of things. Let's just start with it.
Okay, let's just say that this could be one of the worst, or maybe one of the best podcasts we've ever done. It's gonna be pretty fun. So buckle up, sit back, enjoy, and yeah, enjoy. So Bahrain, the first race of the season. Moxie, what do you have to tell us about it?
So there were a few highlights about this race. We saw a collision between Ocon and Magnussen, in which Ocon got a 5 second time penalty. Then we saw a really great fight between Leclerc and Verstappen. And what do you have to tell us about these?
Well, I think Bahrain has proven itself the last 2 years, first of all, that it's such a great place to start off the season. It gives a great excitement, a great vibe to the Formula One season. And in my opinion, the battle between Leclerc and Verstappen was just superb. I really enjoyed it. The fact that Ferrari had the best car, in my opinion, at that moment. Both Verstappen and Leclerc had a good fight. They had a great fight with the mechanics as well, with the strategy and all. And I really enjoyed that race. And to be honest, I was not expecting Ferrari to be so out of the others' league, but they made it out. They won. They got a 1-2 after 2019 in Singapore. They got a good result. They were back on the field and a double DNF for Red Bull, which meant that they had already a good gap with the team that was really looking like they were going second in the constructors at the start of the year. It was a nice start to go for the season. And after that, Saudi Arabia, which had again a great fight, and Verstappen had a good start. Of course, he was not in pole position. Perez was in pole position at that race, and the first ever pole position for the Mexican. Unfortunately, because of the safety car that there was in the race, he didn't have such a good result, finishing P4. Of course, Verstappen was way more superior than Leclerc, and he got at the end of the race in first place, getting the maximum points at that weekend. Moxie, what do you have to say about Saudi Arabia?
Let me add that in Saudi Arabia, we saw Latifi crashing in lap 16 in the third sector. You know what I'm going to say. Latifi just making these mistakes and causing the win from the Mexican, from Checo Perez. Typical Latifi, just typical Latifi. We also saw Ricciardo having a DNF, which was really unfortunate for the McLaren team. And I know that you're a McLaren fan, that had to be painful.
Yeah, it was, but can I just say how much you love Latifi? Like, you should be crying. Like, how are you
Yeah,
still
my
alive after his retirement from Formula One? How? Like, how are you managing? But
uh,
yeah,
since since I heard that Latifi was retiring, I've been crying.
yeah, it's really sad without Nutella Latifi. But yeah, I mean, come on, it's all right. So yeah, round three on the Formula One World Championship, Australia, and it was the first time since 2019 that we had the Australian Grand Prix. It was such a nice excitement, such a great vibe. But of course, even though with so much tragedy again, Verstappen with mechanical failures. He had to retire the car, and he ended up not finishing the race. Leclerc 22 seconds behind, excuse me, in front of Checo Perez, showing how good the Ferrari was, and how passionate and focused Charles Leclerc was in the start of the season. But we, of course, all know that it didn't go well in the end of the season for Ferrari, of course. And such a great result in total. Vettel was back after COVID because he didn't race in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, of course. He didn't bring a good result. He didn't manage to get any points. And let's just add the beautiful last lap pit stop by Alex Albon, which he really well managed to finish on the points. A Williams on the points, and on his third race with Williams team, Alex Albon on the points, going with a stint till the second last lap with the hards. He went on the softs. He finished 10th. What a race it was. And of course, it was the first time that we saw Australia in April, which meant that the conditions weren't that good. It was quite cold, and we also know that it's Australia. It's the South Hemisphere, so it pretty much makes sense that they have reversed to North Hemisphere, as you probably know, which meant that teams that were struggling in terms of power unit issues with temperature that we saw in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were really good. Mostly the Mercedes power units, they were really strong that weekend, if I remember well. Moxie, what do you think?
Yeah, the Australia Grand Prix was a really great race. As you said, Leclerc had a really good start. He managed to finish in the first place. We also saw Max Verstappen, as you said, having a power unit issue in the lap 39, and Vettel having a DNF in the lap 23, which was really sad as he came back from COVID and he didn't manage to bring any points to the Aston Martin team. And we also saw Sainz losing his car control in the second lap and having a DNF, which was really unfortunate. Overall, Australia was a really great race. We saw Leclerc having a win and making and bringing points to the Ferrari team. Nick, back to you.
Yeah, by that moment in round 3, it's looking pretty solid for the Ferraris that they are going to win the Drivers' Championship and probably the Constructors. But luckily for you, the Tifosis, Emilia Romagna was next, and a DNF for Carlos Sainz came after his collision with Daniel Ricciardo. Luckily for Ricciardo, he did not DNF, but again, he did not get a good result that race. Carlos Sainz DNFing on the first lap, and it was the first sprint of the season, of course, if you can remember. And it was a great sprint between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. And on the second last lap, Verstappen overtook Leclerc. And pretty much in the whole race, it wasn't so fascinating because we didn't see so many overtakes. And yeah, it was quite boring, in my opinion. Verstappen got his second race win of the season, and it was a pretty bad luck because Leclerc spun at the end of the race, causing him to lose all his chances for a win and, of course, for a podium position. And let's just say McLaren, the team that was struggling in Bahrain to get points, got a podium. And that shows, in my opinion, how great of a team McLaren is. But okay, anyways, I should not say that, but okay. Moxie, what do you think?
Yeah, I was about to say that you were going to say that. I was really I felt that you were going to say that for you're going to mention the Norris having a podium. which was a really great result. Congratulations to McLaren for that. I'm not going to say much.
Of course.
Yeah, especially you were really happy about that, I suppose. Let me also add on the Emilia Romagna GP, the pit lane accident, incident between Hamilton and Ocon in lap 20, and causing Ocon having a 5-second time penalty for his unsafe release. And what do you think, Nick, about these stewards' decision? Was an unsafe release by Ocon?
Yeah, if I remember well, it was a unsafe release. Of course, didn't have a collision. Great reactions by the Brit of Mercedes, and that didn't cause the collision. And also a pretty bad result from Lewis Hamilton that weekend. But for your question, yeah, I think Ocon deserved that penalty for that unsafe release. Of course, it was really dangerous of Alpine. Of course, Ocon wasn't really in the wasn't really the reason for that incident. But yeah, uh, I'm not the steward, of course. I'm not the one who chooses this, but in my opinion, Ocon deserved this. And let's go now to round 5, Miami, a race that, to be honest with you, I like the track, and I don't know about you, Moxie, but I think the track, even though it's a street circuit, it really has the feel of a track that is not in a city, and it just feels a really good circuit as well. A great result by Max Verstappen, of course, as he won his second race in a row, third in the season. Of course, Ferrari with the pole position in Saturday's quali, they didn't manage to secure the win. A big collision between um, Sebastian Vettel and Mick Schumacher, of course. And let's just mention the black sheep in the whole topic, Valtteri Bottas, the man, the legend. He was managing to battle the Mercedes, and let's just say it was great. It was great from Bottas' point of view. Of course, he had a bit of trouble with oversteer, and he managed to lose both of the position in just one corner from that mistake. But of course, shout out to Valtteri. Come on, shout out to the Flank Fin because, in my opinion, he deserves some spotlight, even though he managed to get some good results in the Alfa Romeo. What do you think, Moxie?
Yeah, about Bottas, I also agree with you that he didn't get the attention he deserved. He managed to fight with Mercedes, which was something that we should all notice and find interesting. About the Vettel's DNF in lap 54 by Schumacher hitting him, I don't have to say much. It's really unfortunate to see Vettel DNFing, but I mean, that's what Formula One is about. We sometimes the drivers have problems and they DNF due to obvious reasons. Yeah, it was. I also agree with you that the circuit is a really good circuit. It's not like a normal circuit which is in the city. And if I remember correctly, this was the first time Miami Grand Prix took place, Nick.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a really nice spectacle. Of course, a huge topic about the Miami GP, how it's going to be constructed and all. And in my opinion, it deserves to be on the calendar. Miami, it had a great, in total, a great spectacle all weekend long, and I think it deserves to be in the calendar. And I think you can agree with me, Moxie.
Yeah, it's a really interesting circuit, not gonna lie. So let's move on to the it was the sixth round with the Spain Grand Prix. There were a few highlights about this race. We saw Sainz losing his car control one more time in seventh lap in the first and second sector. We saw Leclerc having a DNF in lap 28. Nick, what do you have to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's kind of sad to let me just remind that the one who presented the Saturday trophy, of course, whoever watches the Saturday quali, they should know that the person that gets pole position gets a small tire, like the ones that use in the race, and it was presented by Carlos Sainz Sr., the dad of Carlos Sainz Jr., the driver that we all love. And it's quite unfortunate that it wasn't Carlos Sainz the one who got that trophy, in my opinion, on his home Grand Prix, and the amount of pressure that Sainz had caused him to do that mistake in the race. Of course, Verstappen did exactly the same. It was looking pretty solid for Leclerc to go for the win, but a mechanical failure had to happen at some time for the Ferrari. They were bringing so good and solid results with the Monegasque, and unfortunately for Leclerc and Ferrari, that was the race that they lost their championship lead, and unfortunately they didn't get that back with whatever memes we've seen all this year long. I'm not gonna say much. You all know what happened. But yeah, I don't think we have anything else to mention about Spain, to be honest. It was a nice Grand Prix for the way that the track is designed, of course. As we, the track is really more testing for testing motorsport wise, and it's not a great spectacle in overtaking, but it was a really nice one, to be honest, for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, what's your opinion on that, Moxie?
Yeah, it was quite fortunate to see Ferrari drivers double DNFing, and yeah, losing this way the lead in the Constructors Championship. And I also want to add the moment we saw Perez questioning Red Bull strategy and questioning the Red Bull assistant decision of wanting Perez to let Verstappen by and saying that this is pretty unfair but okay, and Verstappen overpassing him and winning the Spain Grand Prix. Nick, what do you have to tell us? What do you have to tell us about that? And then we're going to move on to the Mexico GP, to the
Yeah,
Monaco GP.
yeah. So in my opinion, the teams should work as one, of course. The team be in should do actually some good choices and all. Have they talked about this that Verstappen is the number one driver? Yes, of course, but in my opinion, it was a really tragic result for Sergio Perez. I don't think he quite deserved that in the Spanish GP, and he shouldn't have shown his potential, of course. But at that moment, I can pretty much understand the point of view that Red Bull had, and of course, they chose to let Verstappen by. Just like I said, he's the first driver. He was the one higher on the standings, and he played the Mexican played the team part, of course, that we've seen, and something that we're going to discuss in later rounds here on the podcast in a couple of minutes is that um, Sergio Perez has taken not the best reactions from Red Bull, in my opinion, of course. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Let's move on to the Monaco GP.
Okay, so about Monaco GP, Let me say a few things about the early red flag due to the heavy rain and drivers having difficulty with the circuit. We saw the lovely driver Latifi, who we all love, Stroll and Gasly having difficulties with the circuit. Then we saw Michael Schumacher having a DNF in the laps 27 in the third sector, and Zhou Guanyu not taking the turn the right way in the 50, in the lap 50, and Sergio Perez winning the Monaco GP. You know, Nick, Leclerc must have had a really bad time not winning this circuit and not winning the circuit in his birthplace. And I want to see your opinion about. I want to hear your opinion about this.
At this moment, I don't really care about Leclerc. I care about Latifi. It should have been really horrifying for him, crashing on the formation lap on the Grand Hotel Airpin. Of course, it must have been tragic for him, but that's just life. Oh yeah, and Leclerc, of course, losing the chances for a win at his home Grand Prix. It must have been tragic. Of course, it was the first ever Ferrari strategy that we saw that year. It was really disappointing from the point of view of Leclerc. Of course, it was more tragic for Latifi. I can understand my buddy, but yeah, it was a really interesting one. I'm thankful for the FIA to choose the drivers to go on and just continue the race, of course. But yeah, I'm gonna continue to say that Latifi must have been feeling really horrified after that. Yeah, let's go now to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Moxie, what do you have to say?
So there were a few highlights about this race. We saw Carlos Sainz having, as usual, a DNF in the lap 9 in the first sector. And we also saw Vettel locking up in the 13th lap, losing lots of positions. And finally, we saw Charles Leclerc having a DNF, a mechanical failure by Ferrari, which caused them to not bring points. Any of the drivers didn't bring any points to the team, and losing the gap between Red Bull, who brought a lot of points, as Max Verstappen won. What do you have to tell about? What do you have to tell us about the DNF of Leclerc and Verstappen winning?
Yeah, it was the first double DNF in the 2022 season for Ferrari, of course, and a great fight between the Red Bull teammates. The Mexican, I think, gave a good fight, and of course, Verstappen was faster, but he gave a good battle. The Mexican, in my opinion. So Perez with a great result as well, and yeah, I don't really remember much about this Grand Prix, to be honest. Was it better than the 2021 Grand Prix? I don't think so, of course, but it was a nice spectacle between the Red Bull and the double DNF for Ferrari. It was definitely a spectacle. But yeah, I don't really have to say much about the Grand Prix. And can I just say that what is the FIA doing about Azerbaijan? And 1 week later, 7 days later, we have the Canadian Grand Prix, which doesn't really make sense in traveling wise for the teams mostly. I'm not going to say about the drivers because they're solutions and they are quite professionals at the end of the day in these conditions, but it must be pretty bad for the teams to just organize the traveling and the distance and the time difference between such a big distance. I think it's a really bad tactic for the FIA. In my opinion, they should get tracks like Canada more closer to maybe Miami, which they don't really differ. as much, and I think you can put Miami and after that Canada, of course, and connect mostly Europe and maybe connect China with Australia in terms of traveling, of course. But yeah, still, it's not my choice. That's just my opinion. Moxie, back to you. What I have to say about the Canadian Grand Prix.
So we saw in Canada Perez having a DNF due to mechanical failure in lap 8. We saw Michael Schumacher having a DNF due to mechanical failure in lap 20. We saw Charles Leclerc overpassing the drivers, and we saw an excellent performance by him. What do you have to tell us about that, Nick?
Yeah, it was a really nice race in my opinion. Of course, Leclerc had a grid penalty, and he had a good result in total. It was quite a boring race in my opinion, still, and yeah, the DNF from Yuki was really bad for AlphaTauri. Again, a great result by Max Verstappen getting the win and a pretty easy one. But yeah, in total, a not so interesting Grand Prix. Of course, it's great to be back in the Canadian Grand Prix, and after COVID, of course, and it was a nice spectacle to see the drivers racing at the track Gilles Villeneuve once more. Now let's go to Silverstone, the Great Britain GP. In my opinion, it was one of the best Grand Prix on the 2022 calendar. Moxie, what do you have to say?
We have to say about the UK GP, the huge collision between George Russell and Zhou Guanyu causing a red flag in the first lap. What was that, Nick? I didn't expect that, to be honest. That was tragic.
Yeah, to be honest with you, it should be pretty horrifying for Joe. And the way that the car flipped wasn't supposed to happen, of course, in the gravel, causing him to go over the tires and smashing into the fence which was exactly not the safest thing for the cameraman and the spectators. But of course, in the 2023 regulations, let's just add that the FIA have taken action and they have changed the car chassis to not do that again. But yeah, unfortunate for Alex Albon to DNF. Unfortunate for Latifi getting his best ever qualifying. And unfortunate, of course, for George Russell at his home GP DNFing with a crash that I don't really think um, it was his fault, of course. It wasn't that fault, and it was a racing incident, in my opinion, with all the things that happened in the start. Well done to Carlos Sainz, of course, after such a bad start uh, on the season. Of course, he had a great result in such a great um, race, of course, and what a overtake by Lewis Hamilton, in my opinion, the best overtake uh, in Silverstone and probably in the whole uh, Grand Prix season. The here comes Lewis Hamilton overtake in the last corner between Leclerc, Perez, and Hamilton. Hamilton saw that chance, and we've seen that many times to see an opening before it even happens and just getting the pass. And what's your opinion about that overtake, Moxie?
Yeah, I remember that overtake. Perez and Leclerc were really close, and then Hamilton took the chance and overpassed those two in the lap 46, if I remember correctly. An interesting and well done move by Hamilton, who showed his experience and class. And due to the fact that he was racing in his birthplace Grand Prix, he showed his class and how much a talented driver he is. And of course, well done to Carlos Sainz for winning the Silverstone Grand Prix. Nick, back to you.
Yeah, now let's go to Austria, not so far away from Great Britain. And right, a great finish from Charles Leclerc. Of course, Ferrari couldn't been more better in the strategy. And Leclerc, even though he had a Dutch flying in the back of him, and with the brake trouble with the pedal just sticking to the floor, as Leclerc was mentioning, he brought a good result in getting, I think it was the last race that Ferrari won this season. And yes, it was. Um, and of course, the second sprint of the season, it wasn't that great. Of course, we were expecting some weird conditions, of course. But Moxie, what's your opinion on the Grand Prix?
Yeah, it was a really interesting Grand Prix. We saw a few collisions between Russell and Perez and Vettel and Gasly in lap 1 and lap 4 and lap 40. And we saw Sainz having a DNF due to power unit disaster and Charles Leclerc winning. And yes, you're right. It was the last win from the Ferrari team. And then we saw Verstappen getting his wins, which we're going to talk about in a few seconds, Formula One fans. And yeah, it was a really good race, and we all appreciate the fact that Leclerc won, and yeah, boosting his confidence, and bearing in mind that he is still challenging for the championship. Nick, back to you.
Yeah, it is quite tragic to see the downfall of Ferrari starting and such a great start in Bahrain, showing that they have a better car, good strategies, showing that they have championship material. Just it's quite sad for Ferrari in total. And now let's go to France, the French GP in Le Castellet, a track that we are not going to see in the 2023 season. Let's just add, of course, with Las Vegas and Qatar coming in the calendar and France getting removed. Of course, we're going to have a 23 race season. Interesting Grand Prix, a great fight from the point of view of Charles Leclerc. Again, the mechanics not being up to the task, unfortunately, but again, still a great result for Max Verstappen getting the win. And that mistake, in my opinion, was the time that even the Tifosi said, okay, we've lost it. We have lost every single chance on getting the Drivers' Championship. And you could see the gap between Verstappen and Leclerc on the driver standings growing so much that you were saying it was quite impossible. And if you were saying that, you were right, unfortunately, for the Tifosi. A great battle again from Carlos Sainz. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to mention. What about you, Moxie?
Yeah, I want to talk about the Leclerc DNF in the lap 18, losing his car control in the third sector, and him screaming no, which got a meme. And yeah, really unfortunate to see Ferrari losing the gap between Red Bull. And yeah, Verstappen won. Congratulations to him, and a double podium for Mercedes. And now let's move on to the Hungarian Grand Prix. So
Yeah, it's
Max Verstappen,
yeah. Sorry, you can go on.
no, go.
No, please,
I don't.
you go.
Okay,
No,
okay,
you're more important.
okay. Thank you so much, dear. So we saw Verstappen winning, and he was from the 10th place. He started from the 10th place and then went to the first place. A great work for Mercedes. No, there weren't many highlights about this race. Nothing would have happened, and to be honest, it was quite a boring race. Nick, what do you have to tell us? What if you have to add anything else? We would be really pleased.
Okay, thank you. uh, I will add the fact that Ferrari did the mistake again, and they got in a really weird conditioned track. Leclerc out with the hard compound. The compound couldn't get warmed up, causing him to lose all his chances for a race win in Hungary, of course. And a nice overtake, in my opinion, by Daniel Ricciardo on the Alpines. Who can forget that? A great fight between them, and it was the time that I think Alpine was not showing a good chemistry between the drivers, of course. And yeah, that's about it. And that was the first half of the season, Moxie. Now let's go to Belgium.
Move on with Belgium Grand Prix. We saw Fernando Alonso having a collision with Lewis Hamilton in the first lap, and we also had Alonso criticizing him and saying that Hamilton is only able to drive when he's in the first place, and Hamilton, of course, having a DNF. Nick, what do you have to tell us about that?
Yeah, in total, the race, not a big fan. Of course, we had and Leclerc, but Verstappen as well. Starting from the back of the grid, we expected to have a good fight in the back between those two, but fear not, Verstappen. What was this? I mean, Verstappen was flying, and in my opinion, the Red Bull in Spa was probably one of the best cars Andrew Newey, the engineer of Red Bull, has ever designed. It's a spectacle. The fact that they bring so good machinery um, in just so small period of time. But back to what you said, because I'm a bit getting out of the topic. Yes, in my opinion, Alonso was right. It was a mistake done by Hamilton. It was not something that Alonso could prevent. He was already on the apex. Hamilton didn't even see his mirrors. He closed them and done. That caused Hamilton to DNF. Of course, I don't. Again, I'm gonna say Alonso deserved any penalty. Luckily, he didn't get any. But yeah, to be honest, I'm a bit disappointed from this race as well. It was not one of my favorite races to watch. It was quite boring. A lot of overtakes, of course, happened, but it was, in my opinion, when I was seeing the free practice and hearing about the driver penalties, I was like, okay, it's a good chance for Russell, maybe a good chance for Hamilton to get a win, maybe for Sainz, maybe for Perez to extend their lead, the lead a bit in the Drivers' Championship, but no. Red Bull with Verstappen absolutely nailed this, and it was an absolutely great result from the half Belgium man, the Flying Dutch, Max Verstappen in Belgium. But what's your opinion for the race in total, Moxie?
Yeah, it was a race that, to be honest, I enjoyed. I mean, it wasn't that entertaining, but it had its moments. And we saw, as I said in the beginning, the collision between Alonso and Hamilton. We saw our lovely Latifi having a collision with Bottas, classic Latifi as usual, and Bottas DNFing. We saw a brilliant move by Ocon, who passed Vettel and Gasly, and Verstappen spinning in the last lap when he crossed the checker flag. And we also learned that Charles Leclerc had speeded in the pit lane, causing him a 5-second time penalty. But in total, the race was quite neutral and not really entertaining. So I somehow agree with you.
Yeah. Now let's go to the land of the Dutches, the home race of Max Verstappen. It's a Grand Prix that is really controversial in opinion if it's going to be in or not. Quite boring in terms of overtaking, of course. Yuki Tsunoda, luckily for us, he DNF'd. He had to stop the car, causing a safety car, bringing some great strategies. If you remember well, with George Russell saying, "I want the new softs," and being way faster than his teammate, and Hamilton losing all his chances for a win, a bad call and tactic from Hamilton, which pretty much shows why Russell is bringing so good results and is a way better driver in total in the 2022 season. Um, Again, Verstappen getting the win. A not that well, I should say, result from Leclerc. In my opinion, he had a good chance to go for the win in a track where Ferrari was meant to be quite fast. The qualifying was intense. The qualifying was actually really well, with the top three really close in terms of lap times. Of course, Leclerc had a pretty bad result in the sector two, causing him to lose the chances for pole position. And of course, we had that incident in the grandstands where a bottle was thrown in the track, causing a red flag, and it had to be removed by the race stewards. In my opinion, Formula One should not be like this. But again, I'm not the one who should be choosing anything in this sport. I'm not the steward. But yeah, what's your opinion on this, Moxie?
Yeah, overall the race was really great, and but I will focus on what you said about the bottle. Yes, it's kind of strange to see the whole race being stopped due to a bottle and having a red flag. But I mean, we're not the stewards, and I mean they had their reasons of stopping the race. So, in my opinion, we shouldn't criticize them. And yeah, let's just see the race as a total. We saw Ferrari having a pit stop disaster. We saw Bottas letting his car in the middle of the road. We saw Verstappen winning in his birthplace. Well done to him. And yeah, let's move on to Monza GP. Nick, what do you have to tell us about that?
Again, a Grand Prix that we did not have such a good an excitement. Of course, the DNF with Daniel Ricciardo and the winner curse in the Italian GP, continuing on Daniel Ricciardo, of course, getting the win in the 2021 season, but DNF'd a little before the race ended with a mechanical failure. Um, and it continues on the curse. The safety car did not come in, and we finished in a race that could have had a bit more spice and a battle in the last lap between Leclerc and Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen, of course, getting the win in the land of the Tifosi. Unfortunately for the Ferrari fans, Leclerc said that the safety car should have come in on the second last lap to have a last lap battle with Max Verstappen. A kind of disappointment, to be honest. Not such a fun race, with some overtakes, of course. A track that was a sprint was chosen to not be a Grand Prix sprint this year, and it was in total a interesting one, but not that much, in my opinion. A great race in total. Well done to Red Bull, but it wasn't really entertaining, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was quite unfortunate to see the safety car not leaving in the last lap and Max Verstappen obviously winning due to the safety car. Really fortunate for McLaren, who had a DNF. Ricciardo had a DNF in lap 47, and Sebastian Vettel having a DNF in lap 12. Yeah, no, this race wasn't that entertaining and interesting, but yeah, still we had to include that on our Formula 1022 season review. And now let's move on to the Singapore GP, which was the first preview, the first race which was included to our channel, the race that we started this channel. Nick, what do you have to tell us about the Singapore GP?
Yes, I was gonna mention this, that the Singapore GP, the first ever preview in our podcast. Of course, you make this happen, not us. You are the people, you are the fans, you make this happen. And look at us now making a 2022 review. I'm
Yeah,
speechless, first of
exactly.
all, and it gives some emotions. Racing total with mixed conditions, a track where it's really well known for its wet conditions. It was a weekend that it had rain in the start. We had 1 hour late. We were 1 hour late on the start of the Grand Prix because of the rain. Again, I don't know why the FIA is doing this with the opinions on why they should not start on the wets and if it's not safe and everything. But again, they know better. An interesting race where strategies were really important. Again, a Red Bull won this Grand Prix, and it was Sergio Perez, a man who, after Sebastian Vettel, 11 years after, got a win in Monaco and in Singapore, something that hasn't happened since the 2011 Formula One season. Of course, a great result for McLaren, a bad result for Alpine with the double DNF, giving some hopes for us, the McLaren fans, of course. And I think you can agree with that, Moxie. But
Yeah,
yeah, it was a fun one. It was a good fight between Leclerc and Perez. Of course, Leclerc really close on getting that win, but Perez proved Ferrari wrong. A great result as well for Leclerc against Verstappen, doing so many mistakes. The Dutch in the Grand Prix just not being the cool head, and it was proven that Perez, who in fact was, brought some pretty good results.
yeah, exactly. Sergio Perez won the race. Incredible race by the Mexican, who got who was it was well deserved. He deserved the win. We can't argue about that. I mean, yes, Leclerc had his chances to overpass him and get the win, but still, Perez proved himself to be a really good driver. We saw a few bad actions by Hamilton, who lost a lot of positions due to the choices he made. We saw Max Verstappen locking his brakes, losing a lot of positions. We saw Alonso having a mechanical failure. Overall, a really great race, a really entertaining race. We saw a lot of crashes and safety cars, which make the whole race really entertaining for the fans. And yeah, let's just move on to the Japanese Grand Prix. So
Yeah,
let's start off with Sainz having a DNF, losing his car control. And I want to hear your opinion about this, Nick.
yeah, it was quite disappointing for Carlos Sainz, of course. It was, in my eyes, a really disappointing result for the Ferrari. And again, not such a great race for the Tifosi, with Sainz just losing the car and crashing. And Yeah, it was really in this an interesting race with Verstappen getting crowned as the uh, second time world champion, second time in a row, and it's really interesting after the fact that we only had 28 laps. He was crowned the champion, even though it should have been on half points. And yeah, still a controversial one. The race was red flagged after the whole incidents that were happening in the start of the race, in the restart. A good restart by Sebastian Vettel, getting on the points in one of his favorite races. And of course, let's just not forget one of the best radio messages in the whole 2022 season, Nicholas Latifi. Wow, so good. In FP1, I think it was, or FP2, I really can't remember. Just forgetting the whole track, going in an absolute wrong way, and he said it was the car. It was the car's fault or something. So again, Latifi proving himself. He's the GOAT once more. Moxie, what do you have to say?
Yeah, he's definitely the GOAT. Yeah, it was quite weird to hear that from Latifi. But I mean, it's our lovely Latifi. He can say whatever he can. Yeah, the car had its own mind there, so yeah, we should not just we should move on. And yeah, as you said, it was a really entertaining race. We saw in the last minute, in the last lap, Leclerc corner cutting and Max Verstappen winning his second World Championship after the 5 second time penalty he got due to corner cutting. Yeah, quite unfortunate for Leclerc ending his dream of winning his first World Championship. But I mean, that's what it is, and we should move on. Don't you think so?
Yeah, on to the US GP in the circuit of the Americas. Our third ever podcast, and if you remember well, Moxie, not our favorite. So again, an interesting race. Carlos Sainz on pole position, and you were pretty much saying, "Oh wow, can he do it again? Two races, getting a race win in a Formula One season. Can he do it? Can he break his bad luck? No. After that, starting first, DNFing on the first lap after the carnage that happened between Carlos Sainz and George Russell. Again, George Russell, I don't know what he was trying there, to be honest, in my opinion. It was it a racing incident? It's kind of tricky to say. Of course, these mistakes happen, and it's really hard to judge when you have to start braking, when you have to start steering in the circuit of the Americas in that first corner, and not only that, in the first ever lap as well. So again, a great result by Max Verstappen in a race with lots of overtakes. Of course, you can't forget one of the biggest incidents that we had this year with Fernando Alonso going airborne in the half of the race with Lance Stroll and both Aston Martins looking pretty solid. Lance Stroll DNFing from the race, Fernando Alonso keeping it up after going pretty much airborne and nearly losing all his chances to continue the race. No, he proved himself that age doesn't matter, and he finished P5. A great result by the Spaniard, and he was removed from the points. But a week later, he was back in, really deserved by the Alpine driver. Moxie, what do you have to say?
Yeah, for those who are wondering, the picture of Alonso going airborne in his top of the right corner, and yeah, it was one of the most special and most entertaining crashes of the 2022 season, and we saw Max Verstappen the winning the US GP and overpassing Vettel and Schumacher's records. We having having 13 wins, and then by winning the US GP, he brought to the Red Bull team the Constructors Championship, as they were both Constructors Championship, Constructors Championship champions, and driver standings champions. So, what do you have to tell us about this, Nick? And then we're going to move to Mexico GP.
Yeah, it was a nice fact that Red Bull got both the Constructors and Drivers' Championship, even though it was pretty much obvious that they can't drop such bad results that they're going to cost the Constructors' Championship. Well done to Red Bull doing such a great season and finishing on the top in both championships. A great battle between Magnussen and Vettel on the last laps, I should add. Fortunate for Hamilton, he really lost a good chance for a win, but Verstappen with his car and his talent, proving the Mercedes driver wrong and passing him on the last laps. A great race in total. Had good overtakes, good excitement. It was really an interesting one. And now moving on to the Mexican Grand Prix, in my opinion, one of the worst Grand Prix of the season. Moxie, what do you think?
Yeah, from the aspect of the race, yeah, it wasn't that entertaining. It wasn't an entertaining race, as you said. But about from the aspect of our podcast channel, it was one of the best previews we had, and I think that you can agree on that, Nick.
I knew you were gonna say that. I knew it. I knew it. Come on.
Yeah, you really know me. And about the Mexico GP, we saw Alonso having a DNF, Tsunoda having a DNF as well, Max Verstappen winning, and a great comeback by Ricciardo. And we also saw a tragedy from Ferrari, which was something that he didn't make us curious or whatever. It just Ferrari destroyed our hopes and our expectations of them winning the Constructors Championship by the wrong news. And yeah, one of the most boring Grand Prix of the season, but still really remarkable for our channel.
Yeah, and let's just add that Mercedes had really good chances on getting a race win, but the strategy didn't pay off in a point that with the lap times on the first stint, you were thinking that it was gonna be a good result, maybe a win for Mercedes. Unfortunately, it was not a race win that Mercedes were hoping for. But moving on to Brazil, George Russell, the man, the legend, the only driver that is not a Red Bull or the Ferrari team getting a race win this season and just having a pretty good result, leading pretty much most of the laps with a comfortable win. And let's just not forget one of probably the best qualifying in the whole season, with Magnussen getting pole position in the Haas, a car where if you were gonna see it on the points, you were probably daydreaming or anything else. So, Moxie, what do you think about the Grand Prix in total?
Yeah, the Grand Prix was great. George Russell managed to finish in the first place. He really deserved it. And it was, like you said, the first time a driver who's not part of the Red Bull or either of the Red Bull or Ferrari team getting a win. And yeah, it was very well deserved. Well done to George Russell. He really deserved it. And in total, the race was really entertaining. We also saw Hamilton and Verstappen having a collision, which was quite controversial. Who fault was, but yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a second. Let me just talk about the qualifying session now. Yes, Kevin Magnussen, KM, Kevin Magnussen, the man, he made it. He finished in the first place. Unbelievable. And we all know what he said to Nico Hülkenberg. No one can forget that. Yes, unbelievable what he said. I remember that. But let's not change the topic. A really entertaining race. And now let's focus on the collision Hamilton and Verstappen had. Nick, who do you think was guilty for this incident and for this collision?
First of all, I can't wait for Magnussen and Hulkenberg to be teammates in just 4 months' time. And what was your question? Because I really did not hear and I wanted to say that. So can you repeat?
It's okay, darling. Who do you think was Hamilton? Who do you think was guilty for the Hamilton and Verstappen incident? Was it Hamilton or Verstappen?
Oh yeah, right. I think it was it's a really controversial one, but Verstappen didn't have any space at all, which um, really makes sense. Hamilton really squeezed him, and in my opinion, it was a racing incident in total. It could have been avoided if Hamilton had left a bit space, but it's the track and the whole track, uh, how it's formed in the center S's that really didn't let Verstappen move a bit on the corner in. He couldn't control the car, causing him and Hamilton to collide. And really impressive that by the end of the season, you can understand that maybe it's just me, I don't know, but Hamilton has a car of steel. You can't explain me how he crashed in the Singapore barriers at a whopping 70 kilometers per hour and having no damage at all. It's really mental. What do you think about that, Moxie?
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton's car had a mind of its own. We saw him doing a lot of mistakes this year. That cannot be that cannot be discussed. It happened, and it's something that is something that is true. And about the incident, I think Verstappen was the one guilty who didn't leave space to Hamilton, and they crashed. But as always, our opinions are going to be separated. But that's what about the podcast is. We should have some different opinions so that we can discuss about that. So
Yeah,
let's move on to the Abu Dhabi GP, the last GP, a really special one since it was the last race for Sebastian Vettel, the man, the
and
legend, the
Latifi,
fourth.
and Latifi, and Latifi, of
Yes,
course.
exactly. I forgot Latifi, my man, my sweet man. Uh, Sebastian Vettel last race, the fourth World Time Championship. Quite as we said in the Abu Dhabi GP, which didn't go that well, but still it was not a really bad preview video. Yeah, really unfortunate to see the driver leaving the sport and retiring. And yeah, of course, Max Verstappen won as always. Congratulations to him by ending the season like this. And let's focus on Sebastian Vettel. Nick, what do you have to tell us about this driver
Yeah,
and
I've
this?
said this before, and it's really sad for a personality like Vettel leaving the whole grid. Of course, it's really disappointing, but he had to retire. He wanted to focus on his family, which is respectful, and this makes Vettel the man that he has become. I think Formula One has been a great journey for him. Such a great moment. It's a driver that we should not forget. And also, let's add about Mick Schumacher and Daniel Ricciardo leaving Formula One. Of course, you never know what will happen, especially with Daniel Ricciardo, a driver that is now with Red Bull back again as a reserve driver and a test driver, who is going to be a main reason to how the Red Bull car will be next year, of course. We have lost 4 drivers, especially Latifi, but new talents will come. Piastri is coming, Hulkenberg is coming back, Sargent coming back, Nick de Vries, finally a talent, will be in Formula One. It's something that really makes your excitement go crazy. What is your opinion on that, Moxie?
Yeah, about Vettel, really sad to see him leave, but something ends while it starts. And yeah, about the transfers we're going to see in the 2023 Formula One season. Really interesting to see how Piastri is going to do with McLaren. If we're going to see a battle between him and the British fellow Lando Norris. And yeah, Logan Sargent is also a move which is going to be interesting. Nick de Vries being part of the Formula One community and being the second driver of AlphaTauri. And yeah, I think it's time to end not the video, but we're gonna end the whole Formula One 2022 season review, because now we're going to talk about something else. Nick, what are we going to talk about now?
Yeah, of course, you can write everything in the comments. But Moxie, what was your favorite race, your least favorite race, your favorite radio line, your favorite overtake, and your most underrated and most overrated driver in the whole season? What's your opinion, mate?
So my favorite circuit is the Singapore one, as it was the one who had the most drama with the most DNFs. It was the circuit that we made our first video, which is quite emotional. And I have to give it to Singapore as my favorite circuit for this season. My least favorite circuit is actually the Hungarian one. As I said in the video, it was quite boring for me. Nothing happened, nothing important happened, nothing interesting happened, and that's why I'm going to give this title the least favorite circuit of 2022, the Hungarian one. And the most underrated driver for me is Kevin Magnussen, since he finished on pole, and he had a really great season despite his ups and downs. He was really consistent, and I have to give it to Magnussen. And the most overrated for me is actually Lewis Hamilton. He did a lot of mistakes, and that's why he's my most overrated driver for this season. And my favorite overtake was the one that Hamilton made. It was quite, it was an exceptional one, a quite interesting one. And my favorite team radio is by Charles Leclerc, the "No" in France. Nick, back to you.
Opinions are great, but not so much, in my opinion. I can pretty much agree, but still have different opinions on this. My favorite race, even though I'm not a big fan of how the circuit is shaped and it's really dangerous for the drivers, Saudi Arabia, a race with many DNFs. Of course, unfortunately for us, Latifi crashed, but we carry on. It's okay. It's all right. A great fight between Verstappen and Leclerc till the last laps, which was great. It kept the excitement coming every second, with the last DRS zone in the track being so vile to the whole tactics. The drivers showed the best, and it was a great one in total. My least favorite one was the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix in Imola. Not so many overtakes. I was expecting more, even though it was a sprint. Just not a big fan of it. I don't really have to say anything. The sprint was good, but the race, not a big fan. It had lack of overtakes, and yeah, it was not really exciting. My favorite line, Moxie, I think you can expect this. It's the I don't know what happened by Nicholas Latifi in the free practice sessions in Japan, where he completely lost the way and forgot where to go, causing him to put reverse and come back in the track. It makes you question, what are you doing, Latifi? And for my favorite overtake, Lewis Hamilton really, I think, belongs in this position. A great overtake done by him, and I really enjoyed that. Watching it in the TV. My most underrated driver the whole season, in my opinion, is Lando Norris, a great driver who outperformed his teammates, outperformed his rivals, both of them actually, in a car that wasn't that good. He got a podium. He was the only driver except the top three teams that got a podium, which is really impressive in my opinion. And the most overrated, in my opinion, was Yuki Tsunoda, getting really bad results. The collision that he had with his teammates in Silverstone was really sad. Of course, I'm a big fan of Yuki. He deserves the best, but he did so many mistakes that, in my opinion, are not right with the whole AlphaTauri car that was produced this year. And of course, he was outperformed by his teammate Pierre Gasly, which really shows that the car had more to show in Yuki's perspective. And it's really sad for, of course, every AlphaTauri fan to see Yuki Tsunoda bringing such a bad results. And that's pretty much it for the review, the 2022 review. These are our predictions. If you want to share yours, write them in the comments. We will be delighted to hear them, and we will comment on them about our opinion and everything. And yes, we hope you enjoyed a really long podcast, and I think Moxie, you're gonna agree this was a really tough one. With the time
Definitely.
difference between, yeah, the previews are way smaller. So yeah, I hope you had a nice laugh. You enjoyed the whole review in the 2022 season, and we can't wait to see you again for the next one. So it's been Nick,
It's been Moxie.
and we'll see you for the next one. See ya.
See you guys.